All right. So with this, I think with this context, all of you here have also seen, the kind of, especially the kind of challenges that were faced. So I want to take you through, how we have divided today's topic. If you can see, there are six colors here. I'm going to start off with, sharing a story with you with respect to an incident that had happened on the 27th and 28th of June in the year 1969 in US. After that, we are going to look at the definition of the term transgender, a little bit of the background and the Indian context as well. Then we are going to go on to the challenges faced and the solutions provided under law, a lot of which has also been discussed by Rakshika now for us. Then we are going to look at the duties of family, educational institutions, employer, as well as government. And finally, we are going to look at the consequences of the non-compliance of this law. Before we really start, I want to say two things. We are here for another hour or so, and please feel free to ask any questions that you have. No questions are good or bad. The topic is new, the law is new. There is very little understanding of the subject generally. So please feel free, and you can ask your questions in the chat box as well. After each topic, I'm going to stop for some time and take any questions that you may have. Apurva here is going to also help me with those questions. If we are running out of time and we are not able to take all of your questions, we are going to try and respond to you at a later date by an email or in the chat itself, if it's possible to do today. Then the second thing I want to say is having a discussion around transgender, gender, or even sexuality for that matter cannot happen without touching up on some of the sensitive things, some of the things which are even not talked about in our society. So there is no way in which I can have a discussion, without saying some words or without saying some names. So if at all you feel like, whatever I'm saying or whatever I'm speaking of is something that you are not able to take, or you want to excuse yourself for some time, or you want me to change my examples, change my manner of speaking with respect to a particular incident or example, please feel free to point it out to me. That's absolutely okay. We are going to certainly be monitoring the chat as well, and Apurva is going to help me with that. So with that, I think let me begin with the story. Many of you would have seen these, the colors that you see in the slide right now. You would have seen this a lot in the last month, which is June. And there is a reason behind it. The reason is what had happened on the 28th, very early hours of 28th June in 1969 in a place near New York. It's called as the Stonewall riots. And what had happened over here is that during the 1950s and 1960s, USA used to have very specific, criminal laws for getting hold of LGBTQ community and putting them either in jail or ensuring that they are not part of the regular society. So very few bars would let people from this community even enter into their premises. But Stonewall, was one of those places. Stonewall Inn, it used to be called, was one of those places where people from the community used to go. And police raids at that time were very common. Usually, what used to happen was when police would raid, typically, however they would see a person dressed, they would, inspect whether they are actually that particular gender or not. So, for example, if a person is appearing to be dressed as a woman, they would, the woman police officer would take this person to the washroom, check whether their, sex is the same as, their clothes or not. And if they happen to be different, if let's say somebody was cross-dressing, then they would be put in jail. That used to be the usual process. However, on this particular day, it did not go as per the normal process, and fights broke out. And ultimately, what the police did was they took hold of everyone who was in the bar and put everyone in jail for the time being. This led to a lot of backlash and led to a lot of incidents which were followed by the night later, the following night, as well as a couple of incidents that happened 1 week later. That's why they are called as the Stonewall riots, because they literally turned into riots between people and the police officers. Once this incident happened, this led to actually the movement in USA with respect to the rights or the protection of the LGBTQ community. And post this, two organizations were set up, a couple of newspapers, three newspapers actually were established. And after 1 year, that is on the 28th of June 1970, the first Pride March was held. So that is where the history is coming from, and that's how US started celebrating June as the month. Actually, June as the entire month, which is called as now the Pride Month, has come into existence now. But back then, it used to be celebrated as a Pride Day or a Pride Parade, usually around the 27th or the 28th of June. So this is how the history has been, and now the entire world is celebrating it. So frankly, if we have to look at the Indian Pride situation, it would probably be the NALSA judgment, or probably be the time when the Nafte's Singh judgment came out, which decriminalized Section 377. So with that, I'm going to now discuss with you a little bit about the term transgender. This is very important because the entire law itself is dependent on this definition. Let's look at the definition. Under the law, it says that a transgender person is going to mean a person who's, sorry, just 1 second. Yeah, is going to mean a person whose gender roles does not match with the gender assigned to them at birth. Okay, and it includes a trans man, a trans woman, or any person with intersex variations, or who are gender queer, or people having any socio-cultural identities. And there are a couple of socio-cultural identities that are being referred to here, which is Kinnar, Hijra, Aravani, and Chokras. So this is how the definition goes. Now, a little bit of discussion is required on this term itself. Before we get there, I have a question for you. I am going to launch this poll, and please let me know what you think about this. The question is there a difference between gender and sex? All right, is anybody else voting? I'm going to be ending the poll now. Yes, that's absolutely correct. So majority of you have said that there is a difference between gender and sex. I have one follow-up question to this also. I have shared the polling with you. The question is there a difference between gender identity and sexuality? All right, I'm going to be closing the poll now in another 5 seconds. All right. Thank you so much. Yes, this is also correct. There is a difference between gender identity and sexuality. The reason I am asking this question, both of these questions actually, is because this forms the very basis of the term transgender. Usually what happens is when we discuss about a transgender, automatically the word LGBTQ comes in, or QIA plus also comes in. However, there is a difference. So let's look at how they are different. Let's look at the basics first. There is something called as the biological sex. Biological sex is something which refers to the sex that has been, physically speaking, the sex that has been assigned to us at birth, which would be referring to chromosomes, XX or XY characteristics. These are also referred to as primary sex characteristics. They also determine whether a person is male or female, technically speaking. There are also secondary sex characteristics, which are like facial hair, etc. Most common example is that. This is basically the biological sex. There was a time when sex and gender used to mean the same thing. When you say what is your sex, it used to be male and female, and when you would ask what is a gender, it used to again be male or female. But there is a vast difference between the two. How? Because gender identity is not to do with the sex organs that we have. It is to do with what we think and identify ourselves with in our mind, in our brain. So if you see here also, it clearly defines gender identity is how you in your head identify yourself. It is a chemistry that composes you and how you interpret what that means. So gender identity is significantly different from what biological sex really means. Now coming to sexual orientation is what we feel sexually towards another person, or the attraction that we have. So again, biological sex and sexual orientation are not the same things because of the word sex in it, right? So orientation would mean how we are sexually attracted to somebody. And lastly, there is something called as gender expression. Gender expression and gender identity would usually go hand in hand, because if I have a certain kind of an identity, I would want to project that identity. I would want to express myself that way. Right now, what happens is that a lot of people who may identify with something are not able to express themselves in the same manner. There is a huge gap between that. And perhaps someday this law will also help in resolving this particular challenge. I also want you to have a look at this on the screen right now. This is the judgment of the Supreme Court, which came out in 2014, the very commonly called as the NASA judgment. The full form is National Legal Services Authority versus Union of India. And it has very beautifully defined the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. All the people who are students of law here or are lawyers, frankly, Supreme Court comes out with wonderful judgments from time to time. I think this is one of those masterpieces as well. Every time I end up reading it, I just feel wonderful about it. This as well as the Navtesh Singh judgment. So in case if you want to read it, please read it. It gives you a lot of information on this topic. It's on its own itself. So let's look at how this particular judgment has defined these terms. It says that gender identity refers to each person's deeply felt internal and individual experience of gender, which may or may not correspond with the sex assigned at birth, including the personal sense of the body, which may involve freely chosen modification of bodily appearance or functions by medical, surgical, or other means, or other expressions of gender, including dress, speech, and mannerisms. Gender identity therefore refers to the individual's self-identification as a man, woman, transgender, or any other identified category. Similarly, they have also gone ahead and defined sexual orientation, where they are saying that sexual orientation refers to, Sexual orientation refers to an individual's enduring physical, romantic, and/or emotional attraction to another person. Yeah. Gender identity and sexual orientation, therefore, are different concepts. Each person's self-identified sexual orientation and identity is integral to their personality. This part is a very important part. That is where self-perceived gender identity and sexual orientation comes into picture, because it is each person's choice and it is each person's understanding of themselves. It is not the society, not the family, not anybody else who is going to really take a call for us. So this becomes an important part of the judgment.